Colleen Murphy from University of Colorado. We're going to try to moderate this. So I'll start off by introducing Dr. Buskey from the Board of Surgery. I don't think she really needs much of an introduction. She did her training at Mass General in Boston and has worked at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. She's been with the Board of Surgery since 2008, and she's now, I think for the last 3 years, has been the executive director. So Dr. Buskey is going to fill us in on the EPAs, and I think as I was looking through last night, we're about halfway through the timeline that the board has set. So she's going to update us on that whole on the EPAs.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me. It's my first visit to the Southwest Surgical Congress. I'm really delighted to be here. And it's a different group of people than that I meet at some of the other meetings. So it's a privilege and an honor to be here. EPAs has been our biggest project for the last couple of years, and we started focusing on it in 2016. So we're 7 years in. It'll be 2008 before residents who are used EPAs as an assessment and as a admissibility criteria for board certification actually graduate. And it'll really be longer than that before we have a fully mature product and we understand what all the implications are. So I have 12 minutes to talk about our 15-year initiative. Fortunately, at the end, I have a few resources for you to learn a little bit more about it. I'm a full-time salaried employee of the American Board of Surgery, so some of my opinions are almost certainly colored by that. I was at the APDS earlier this week also talking about EPAs, the Association for Program Directors in Surgery, and I know some of you were there as well. And when I left there, I saw that someone had given a presentation that included a tweet where they used GPT-4 and just said, explain EPAs to a 5-year-old. And this is about as good as any slide I've ever made or any explanation I've ever made to the power of artificial intelligence and trustable professional activities are a list of important skills that grownups need to learn and practice to be really good at their jobs. And that sort of summarizes it. So right now, our requirements for admissibility to the exams to become board certified are based on time and on numbers for the most part. There are a few objective tests of skills, ATLS, ACLS, FES, but mostly you can see numbers, time. And we all know that people learn at different rates, and it takes them different number of cases of different, different types. Some people will be good after 6, and some people still won't be good after 25 or 30 or 50. So it's a flawed concept, and yet it is one that has worked incredibly well. I have to say, the current system turns out very good quality surgeons, and I'm really in a position to see how that works over the country. We have 352 residency programs. We come into contact with a lot of them, and I think that we train really good surgeons, but it's incumbent upon us always to look at our practices and continue to do better. So the current system, we know that residents start, they learn at different speeds, and they finish at different places, right? So some of them go on to do fellowships, and we might say that person does not need to be doing an MIS fellowship. They've got all the skills that they could possibly need, but they need it for the job market, or they need it for whatever they need it for. And so hopefully that, farthest back person is good enough. But we know that they finish at a different place because 5 years trains you differently. People are going to learn differently. What we really want is a system where everybody progresses along the route that they express, and they all get to the same endpoint. And what we have to do is decide what exactly is that minimum endpoint. We're not looking for the A+, we're saying who is the safe, certifiable surgeon. And this, I said that we started being interested in this in 2016, which is true. A group of people flew to the Netherlands, which is the country that sort of initiated EPAs. But really this charge came from the oft quoted Blue Ribbon panel that published a paper in 2005 after taking a long 2-year look, or maybe 3-year look, at what surgery the training field of surgery looked like, and making a lot of recommendations. And then duty hours restrictions, that's what DHR stands for, had an additional impact. One of the things that they recommended at the time was that there should be a curriculum of some sort, that there should be an enclosed body of knowledge that general surgeons should have, or that they should have at the end of their training. And that resulted in SCORE, which is now used by about 95% of surgery training programs. Before that, there wasn't a curriculum. There wasn't a sort of understanding, a shared model of what it is that everybody needed to know at the end of their residency, which makes it hard to learn or to study. And one of the other recommendations was verification of competence at each level of training. So we kind of do that. We sort of do that. We have the CCC, the clinical competence committees. We have the end of month rotations. We have a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. Are they ready for the next year or are they not? But I would say to you that we could do better than we do right now. And I also want to emphasize, people talk a lot about competency-based education, meaning that you're taught at the speed and at the level that you need to be taught at with the tools that you need to be taught by. So that if you're a visual learner, you're taught visually. Those little forms we all have patients fill out. Are you an auditory learner? Do you learn by doing things with your hands? And we're not there yet. The first step to competency-based education is competency-based assessment. And that's all we're talking about now. We're assessing people based on the skills that they have. So why are we converting to this system? One of the most important features is that our residents are asking for feedback. The old, you didn't hear anything from me, so you're doing fine, isn't good enough. The end of month rotation that says that you need to work more on practice-based learning or systems-based practice isn't good enough. It's too far removed from the event. EPAs are really the equivalent of, let's say you spent one full day with a resident and you did 4 lap choles or 5 lap choles during that day with that same resident. I think everyone in the room would agree that they're going to do that last one better than they did the first one. But if you take that same resident and have them do 1 lap chole with you a week for 5 weeks, it's just not the same, right? They don't get the same intensity of feedback and conversation. And if you do this way, it will be better next time, and then they can apply it immediately. So EPAs greatly enhance the frequency and the timeliness of the feedback. That's one of the main charges. And then it uses the tool that the board has. There aren't that many levers that our profession controls in surgical training. A lot of them are controlled by the hospital, by the government, by law, by HR. But the RRC has levers. They can control program requirements, and the board has levers. They can control the assessment of residents. So it's something that we can actually control. We talk about levels of entrustment in EPAs, and there are 5 levels. Can teach others is great. It's a lovely aspirational goal. I'm going to say that not every surgeon can teach other people. I was taught math. I can't teach math. So just because you were taught surgery doesn't mean you can teach surgery. And I think that is a huge flaw in our current education system and probably the next frontier for us to fix. That surgical teachers should be teachers and not just every surgeon that there is. So can teach others is a very nice goal. We're not going to require that for board admissibility. Limited participation, kind of the medical student or the early intern, someone who has earned the privilege of being in the room, not just, the person on the street, someone who has a right to be there, but really can't do anything. And then the rest of these I'll go through more by example. And just to note, we already do this, right? When you're scrubbing at the sink with a resident that you may know a little bit about, you're like, I think that they're okay. I'm going to let them get started. I'm going to just go do this one more thing while they prep, drape, maybe make the opening incision. And that's fine. You can say, we're already doing this. We already assess how we trust them, but it's not documented. No one else knows about it. You may think differently in a different day. And there's no standard. There's no shared model for whether they're ready to start this thing or not. So what exactly is an EPA? That's a little EPA inside joke that we all get hysterical about in the office. It's the essential task. It's an entrustable professional activity, an essential task of the discipline that someone can be trusted to perform independently. If you gather together a book of EPAs, they essentially define a specialty. And it shifts the focus from, is this resident know enough, in theory, to can this resident do that thing? Can this resident take care of a patient with gallstone disease? Broadly, not do they have all the knowledge. This is a list of the 18 general surgery EPAs, too long to read, but you can see that they're not all about an operation. The evaluation and management of a trauma patient, for example, providing surgical consultation, perioperative care of the critically ill patient. So they're about the spectrum of care that we provide, not just the technique of the care that we provide. A lot of them do have an operative component as well. But to shorten the presentation, I didn't show all of the volunteers who've been involved in this project, but we basically used an iterative process and subject matter experts to hone in on not just what we thought defined the field, but also things that were measurable, the things that we can observe, that we can assess, and that are done often enough to do this. I love this slide because it's kind of how we think of ourselves as general surgeons, right? EPAs cover the whole body. The list of 5 things on the left are from our pilot. We actually did a 2-year pilot in 2018 to 2020 to demonstrate that EPAs, or to actually ask the question as to whether EPAs were feasible or not. So for the EPAs that have a surgical component to it, this is an easiest way to explain it. The different colors of the levels of entrustability. So there's in the preoperative phase, can you take care of a patient with gallstone disease? The person who's taking care of them could do kind of a generic H&P. Whereas if they're a little more entrustable, they can actually get a decent informed consent. A little more entrustable, they recognize some of the more complex problems. More entrustable, they can oversee the complex care and get them ready for an operation if they're sicker. Interoperative, they basically know the anatomy but can't really do anything. They can describe things versus they can get started but they need a lot of redirection, versus they move fluidly through the operation, versus they recognize when something's amiss or the anatomy is different. So it all makes sense, right? And then post-op, recognizes typical recovery, recognizes a deviation from recovery, can proactively manage comorbidities. And this is it laid out according to the entrustable levels for a patient with gallbladder disease. So limited participation can talk about it, basically. Direct can talk about it, but can't reliably do it. Indirect, they can get a critical view of safety in a easy case, and they can do a cholangiography in a straightforward case. Practice ready, they can do it in basically everybody in the harder and more complicated patients. And I'm going to leave out teach others because, again, aspirational only. So how are we going to get this done? In the pilot, we learned that we really need to provide the tool, and it probably needs to be a mobile app on a phone to make it easier for faculty to pull it up, do it at the end of each case, do it at the end of resident interactions, drop down menus, clicks, prompts, links to the case logs. It's quite a nice app being developed by the same people who develop Simple. And what makes us think this is going to work? EPAs are mandatory in the country of Canada across all specialties. General surgery's in, I think, about its third year, but the first group was ortho. And what they found was greatly increased feedback, improved the trajectory of learning of the residents. And after 4 years, almost 2/3 of them were done after 4 years of training, not after 5 years of training, which is my suspicion for EPAs in this country as well. From our pilot alone, you can see the sort of reliability. The bottom left is a low PGY year and low entrustability, and the high right in all of these domains is a high PGY year and a high level of entrustability. So it turned out to be pretty reliable across 28 different institutions. As an interesting aside, we found out that women tend to rate themselves a full level lower than men do because the residents assess themselves also, which is just interesting without any kind of judgment around it. But the faculty didn't do that. So the self-assessments were lower, but the faculty assessments smoothed out. So how are we going to use this? We're going to require it for board certification. We don't keep all the information. We don't get every assessment. That's for the programs. It gets compiled. The competence committee looks at it and says they're doing really well in these areas. They're about where we would hope they would be. They're ready to advance, or they need an extra rotation or more time or more feedback. We're starting this year, July of 2023. Our goal is really progressive engagement. The programs get familiar with the app, that they start assessing residents, that they start identifying which rotations will use which EPAs. And how are we really going to use this? Well, I think it means we don't have to count days anymore, right? To finish surgical residency, you have to do 48 weeks of training. And if you do 47 and a half, well, then you have to work until July 3rd. If you do 46, then you have to work until halfway to July because all we have is time. And so people say, we have this great resident, they had a baby, they took 10 weeks off for some additional complications, but we think they're ready to finish. And we say, you think they're ready based on what? The board's mission is to the public. So we have to be sure that we think they're ready is based on something. And EPAs means that I don't have to say, you didn't do 48 weeks or 44 weeks if you have a child. I just have to say, did you meet all of your EPAs, which is a much cleaner place to be. Similarly, when COVID hit, we cut back on case requirements and time requirements by 10%. Based on what? Based on nothing, right? We used to say that it had to be 850 cases. And then that one year we said, okay, 765, because we had to. 850 wasn't based on anything. 765 isn't either. 48 weeks not based on anything. 44 weeks not either. I want it to be based on the idea that you've learned what you need to learn. This is a checklist. This is actually on our website for what programs can do to start to get ready. This is the web page that has a ton of information about EPAs if you want to look into it a little bit more. And I did it in 15 minutes.
Okay, we're gonna, we have to move on to our thing, but we'll take time for just one or two questions for Dr. Buskey. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So, in surgery, we like to say small hole, little problem, big hole, big problem, right? So one of the things that stopped us from moving to competency-based advancement or assessment was that exact question. Incredibly difficult, the toxic interface of work and education that exists really only in our profession in 2023. So we're not biting that right now. We're only going to look at assessment. When are they entrustable? And maybe we'll learn that everyone's entrustable after 3.5 years. And then we can say, actually, surgical training could be shorter. But to try to say now, oh, you can finish it, 4.3 years or 4.7 years. We don't really know that these are fully valid. So we're taking one bite at a time. Yes.
Thank you very much. One thing that's come up in our residency is how is the qualifying sort of change the mold around the EPA or is it?
So there is actually a question of whether you need a certifying exam anymore if you've been entrusted. Qualifying exam, yes, part of the public trust, hard knowledge, walk around knowledge. Certifying exam, if you've been entrusted by your peers, do you actually need to have a test of judgment? And again, we think that the answer is yes, because taking it from a local environment where people know you and like you and have at least some vested interest in your advancement to a sort of independent outside observer probably fulfills the public trust. We are crosswalking the curriculum of all the exams to make sure that they match the EPAs and vice versa and score as well. So they will end up being synchronous. I think, is that the right word? Harmonious anyway.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Buskey. Appreciate that.
All right, we will move on to the second portion of our program. So yes, we'd love our panelists to come join us on the stage here. So as they're joining us on the stage, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about this topic. So last year at this meeting, knowing that I was going to be chairman of the GME committee this year, Dr. Murayama took the opportunity to have a discussion with me as we were thinking about topics for this, and networking came to mind. We all know networking has changed a lot since the pandemic, and I think even the feel of the meetings post-pandemic has changed a little bit. I think attendance patterns have changed as well. And so our goal was to kind of look at that and talk about, what is really important these days as our trainees work to build their career, and how do they do that, and what is the best way to network. So just to give you a little bit of background, as an academic surgeon, I went to see if there was any evidence in the literature to help us explore this topic. In the surgical literature, there's nothing. And so I moved on and went to looking at, business school literature and this sort of thing. And really, there's a lot of kind of op-eds out there that I came across. This was the most recent one that I found that was actually just from a month or two ago this year, talking about executive networking post-pandemic. And this is from Forbes. The premise of this article is, yes, we've changed how we network. And now we really kind of have two buckets that we think about with networking. We think about online networking, and then the more traditional in-person. And there's pros and cons to each. And I hope that this discussion today will help us kind of outline that, and especially within the field of surgery. So this article highlighted online advantages is that it gives us the opportunity to make the world very small. We can connect with people internationally. And one of the things that's nice about online is we can do that at any time of day. The time change doesn't matter as much because you can pop on whatever your form is, and make connections with other people. It also allows us to do real-time interaction, have these hybrid meeting models where someone who may not attend the meeting but can also interact virtually. Certainly the more traditional in-person advantages, the thought is that maybe we can build deeper connections. You can rely on body language, and just spending human interaction time is going to create a deeper bond than potentially online Zoom forums might, and maybe even create a longer and better impression. So the question is this really a better way to communicate, and how do we navigate both? So as there was no real evidence that we could rely on to discuss these two platforms. What I did was assemble some of the leaders of our organization here who've built wonderful careers in surgery and talk about their experiences with both online and in-person networking. So let me introduce these individuals to you. So I started with Dr. Murayama since he helped me come up with this idea. So Dr. Murayama is Chair and Program Director of the Department of Surgery at the University of Hawaii. And then Dr. Burlew, she is a trauma and acute care surgeon at the University of Colorado Anschutz. Dr. Langenfeld, so he is division head of colorectal surgery at the University of Nebraska. And then Dr. Coleman, who is acute care surgeon and trauma surgeon at the University of Louisville. And then finally, Dr. Stewart, who's professor and chair of University of Texas Health Sciences Center at San Antonio. So the next piece of information I wanted to give to you all is what is their online presence? So they knew I was going to do this. So I went through the different social media platforms and looked up their profiles. So I'm going to go through these with each of you so you understand kind of where they're coming from. So Dr. Murayama, I started with Twitter. So you can see he has 32 tweets, it looks like. A few hundred followers. And then I also looked to see what was his most recent interaction. And it looks like it was back at 2020, I think. It looked like it was a retweet. So let's move on to Dr. Burlew. So Dr. Burlew has over 2,000 followers. And her most recent tweet was also a retweet just last month. And then Dr. Langenfeld. So he has over 4,000 followers. And this was from Friday I did this. So here's the retweet from Friday. And then Dr. Coleman. So Dr. Coleman has over 50,000 followers. Has this beautiful, beautiful branding on her Twitter page here. And also recent retweet. And I should say, I think Dr. Coleman, I think Dr. Biden is one of your followers. Is that correct? That's what it said when I logged in. By that, I meant Dr. Jill Biden, I think. And then Dr. Stewart, over 4,000 followers. And then also recent retweet. So by far and away, Twitter is by the most common platform that this panel uses. So I did buzz through everyone's Facebook pages. Here's Dr. Murayama, has multiple friends. Most recent interaction was in 2016. Dr. Burlew, 2 friends. No posts. Dr. Langenfeld. New profile picture. And then Dr. Coleman, also the same, the branding here from a few years back. And Dr. Stewart, there was lots of Ronald Stewarts. I couldn't tell which one was you, if that was you at all. And then Instagram, no Dr. Murayama that I could identify. Same with Dr. Burlew. It looks like you don't interact a lot with Instagram. And same with Dr. Coleman, too many Jamie Colemans. And then LinkedIn. So some of you did have some LinkedIn profiles. So Dr. Murayama definitely has lots of followers there, but not a lot of recent activity. Dr. Burlew, no LinkedIn profile that I could find for you. And also a profile for Dr. Langenfeld. No recent activity. Dr. Coleman, no recent activity. And same with Dr. Stewart, a profile, but no recent activity. All right, so that is the background of our esteemed panel here. So the way we plan on doing this forum is just to have an open discussion. I created some questions, certainly if you all have questions from the audience. the first question I have that I'd love everyone to answer is, how did you get your first job out of training? And obviously times were different back then than they are now, but I'm curious on how everybody did that. And we can start at the end of the table and work backwards maybe.
All right, can you hear me? So two things, I need a new picture without the beard. And two, I clearly am not very social media adept. So my first job actually was before social media existed. As I recall, my cell phone at the time was a big brick. So it was really about my chairman sending my resume and a cover letter out to about 40 different chairs around the country who he had a relationship, friendship, a social network with, if you will. And that's how I ended up getting my first job at the University of Nebraska back in the day before social media.
I'm still at my first job. I've been there for 11 years. The way that I got my job is I had a wonderful chief, John Thompson, who, even though there wasn't a job, he kind of made one, if that makes sense. And I had emailed him and said, I'm coming to Omaha. I can work with you, work against you, kind of in a polite way. There was a pretty big private practice group across town that I also entertained. I knew I wanted to teach. And so the only reason I got in was because I had great mentors who were willing to kind of take me on and help me build, if that makes sense.
I managed to turn it on and off 5 times here in the span of a few seconds. I'm still at my first job too. I had been a resident in San Antonio and did my fellowship at the University of Tennessee in Memphis. And I basically came back because it felt like home to me. And I've been there for 30 years, so.
I stayed exactly where I trained, and I think that can happen to many of us. I was supposed to return to Texas, where I had been in Dallas for medical school, went to Denver for my training for residency and fellowship. And the weather in Denver is way better than it is in Texas, I hate to tell you.
Don't believe that
Yeah.
for 1 second. Go there in December, you'll see what I mean.
Don't go in August. So I stayed exactly where I trained, which again was an easy choice, if not a challenging.
I did my fellowship at Grady in Atlanta, and actually David Feliciano approached me pretty early in my fellowship about staying. And so the plan was for me to stay. However, in 2009, late 2009, right before finishing, some changes happened at Grady. And so it was a little bit of all of a sudden I need to find a job. But that being said, thankfully I had Grace Rozicki, David Feliciano, and they knew everybody in the trauma world. So they picked up the phone and started calling. And actually we all ended up going to IU basically together. So definitely for me, it was a little bit of a lesson in the value of mentorship and the in-person networking when, sometimes God has a laugh at plans. I had a plan. He left. But in those kind of last minute moments, having people that knew so many people across the field, it wasn't nearly as stressful as it could have been at that point. So that's how I got my first job.
Great. So I'm actually going to ask Dr. Burlew and Dr. Coleman, who recently transitioned jobs in the past few years, in the presence, I think, of both of your social media activities. So did that influence you on how you obtained your new positions? Did it come up in conversation as you were interviewing?
I got this one. So it's interesting. Same thing at my last job. There were some changes happening and people know it's a small world. And so I started getting phone calls, kind of asking about some of the changes and, oh, by the way, would you might be interested in looking? And I think, again, as it's a small world, I was like, well, maybe I should start looking. And so I did. And then I think people were like, oh, she's interviewing. And I think a lot of that did come from in person and social media in terms of networking at national meetings where people then get to know you, feel like they get to know you. I will say, full disclosure, at one job interview, I was interviewing for a division chief position, and the chair expressed concern that I was too public or too well-known. He was concerned that if the job didn't work out there, would that reflect poorly on the institution? And so there's a little caveat to it when you're viewed as being a public sort of person. That being said, I do think it added a different aspect of my, application or CV, where a lot of what we've talked about with the social media, this is a little bit of an aside, but as you are academic, there's great evidence that shows if you have visual abstract, your citations go up. If you tweet about it, the citations go up. So I do think that the vast majority of positions I was interviewing for, the leadership at those departments felt like it was an advantage, but it wasn't uniform. I definitely had one that wasn't sure about it.
Yeah, I think to jump off two different points that Dr. Coleman mentioned. Number one, even though I think most of us on our social media profiles or when things, we say this is our own personal opinion. And yet it still is going to reflect upon you and upon your current environment. And that's going to include your job. And so I think to be every time that I tend to, I'm not as active of a tweeter. And I do think it's a really important way to connect with people, to see who's out there, to see what people are saying, to sort of stay current with other individuals. And before I hit retweet or I send a tweet or I do anything, I really think about how this is going to reflect upon not only me, but the other individuals in my group and in my life. And so I think that has always been an interesting component to it. I think also, as Jamie mentioned, for me, the in-person networking was crucial. I think all of us can say that we don't always know where life is going to take us. And I think, I was, I guess, fortunate from the standpoint that having been at meetings such as this for many, many moons, people know you in a different way. And so when you hit a crisis, you can actually reach out to those individuals that you really thought you were just going to maybe have a social, relationship with for the whole rest of your life. And suddenly you're partners because you reach out and they are accepting and supportive. And so I think in-person networking is critical because you know these individuals and you do know them in a different way than you know them from social media. And I think that can be a huge help as you transition and look at other possibilities.
So building on those great points. So the other members of the panel, you're certainly in positions where you're bringing in faculty and new hires. Do you look on online profiles? Is that something that you discuss if you have someone like Dr. Coleman? Like, how do you approach that from a hiring point of view?
So it's interesting that I'm chair and program director, so I don't actually need to look in social media. Our residents and young faculty bring to my attention when things turn up. So as we're recruiting, they go and check on social media for that person. The residents actually go on social media as we bring applicants through for the interview process and then bring things to my attention. And I'll give you an example. About 3 years ago, the resident said, that person we interviewed posted a bunch of things about the interview day here yesterday. And I said, oh, were they positive? And they said, well, the person didn't come to the welcome reception. This is 4 years ago when we were in person, didn't come to the welcome reception and said it was because they were sick. But on social media, there was a picture of that person walking along the beach in Waikiki the night before during the welcome reception. And so it set it off on a bad foot for that person, not with the faculty because we didn't socialize that, but with the residents who knew about it. They already had a negative impression of that applicant because they had fabricated the story that they had gotten late, was sick from the flight, so couldn't come to the welcome reception the night before. So it's one of those things I try, as you can tell, that the amount of social networking presence is inversely proportional to age. But I try not to have a presence because I try to lead by example for our residents, and what you put on there is there. And I always instruct them as they're looking at jobs, as they're starting to get more along in their residency, be careful what you post, because someone somewhere is going to look at things. And it doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to judge you differently, but as Dr. Coleman said, there's always that possibility that someone's going to take it the wrong way. I have 3 millennial children who are all in medicine, and I've counseled them as well, as they've looked at residency, looked at jobs, applied to residency, that you really need to be careful, because you just never know how people are going to interpret what they read out there.
Social media is an exceptionally powerful tool. And so the applicant for any position, whether residency position or job position, you can kind of build an online reputation and kind of mold it, just like the Instagram filter, make yourself look like a great person. That's great. That's fake, but that's very, so I think it's very important that I go on there and look at people, because where there's smoke, there's fire. If I see just a little whiff of unprofessional behavior that they're willing to share with the world, what are they going to be like in person? A lot of times it can be a lot worse, if that makes sense. And so I think it's sort of almost your job to look online. And the reason is, I mean, participation is optional. You don't have to tweet if you don't want to tweet, but certainly you guys have to understand that the patients are online. And so if you want to interact with them, we want to know what they see, then you need to see what's out there. And there are unprofessional people who tweet something to their audience of 20 people and they think there's no big deal. But as soon as that person gets in trouble for another reason, and the spotlight is on that person, they'll go back and look through 10 years of tweets and find something. Perfect example is when people tweet with like, I'm being a little much of a stickler here, but if somebody's like drinking. I remember there was like a Sunday fun day where all the residents from a program were at a brewery, and it was for Puerto Rico, like disaster relief. What a great cause. I was like, if anybody has a bad outcome on Monday and the lawyers start looking through your profile, they're going to find this pretty quickly. And they're going to say, I see that you were having a few drinks today before surgery, doctor. How'd you feel that morning? You know, these are like real things that happen. They're not hypothetical. And so I pay very close attention to what people are doing online, if they're either employed by my employer or they're training where I'm at. So it's an exceptionally important thing to know.
Maybe I should, but I don't. I think I have a social media presence because I was told I needed to do it. It's really Twitter. If I could, I would cancel my Twitter accounts considerably harder than you might think to do. And I think there's a great op-ed in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. You can have the red pill or the blue pill, but we're out of the red pill. And the writers of that are talking about artificial intelligence, and they talk about the algorithmically driven social media was the first interaction with AI, and humans lost. Humans lost. So to me, I don't look, although I will hear about it from residents or people who do, but not a lot. We don't use it a lot. I think one of the downsides of social media is it's permanent and people make mistakes. They make a mistake and then it's with them forever. And so I haven't needed it for the past 40 years and I don't feel like I need it now.
I guess want to make a couple of comments on these really good points is that I think number one, anything that you're going to spend time on, you need to have a why behind. And I will say that social media for me, it's interesting because I get invited, for these talks, but Sean and I have done several of these together, and it was very accidental for me. I was writing for US News and World Report and Huffington Post, and they wanted you to have a Twitter handle. Okay. I didn't even understand Twitter. Like, I don't understand. There was like a character limit. I was like, so I don't get it. What do I do with this? And I think for me, I kind of came to my why after it started building. It was not intentional. It was not oh, I want to get to a certain amount of followers and just the content kind of ended up that way. And I will say that I have had those moments that actually, I will tell you, once I crossed about 20,000 followers, I really started almost to become paralyzed before tweeting because I luckily, knock on wood, I've not had like a controversial tweet. I've not had an issue with any of my content. But when you start realizing that I can make a joke post about Girl Scout cookies and how I don't like Thin Mints, and all of a sudden I'm looking at 500,000 impressions on it, it just gets paralyzing. And so it's interesting. I will say that definitely after I hit the 50,000 mark, you'll see I almost rarely tweet now because you do. And all of a sudden I'm going to say something and then have 1 million people look at it. I don't know what I want to say that I want to have 1 million people look at. I mean, I just wish I could get my kid to listen to me on occasion. And so I will say that I agree with all of the comments is that it's permanent. I always stop to think about what would my spouse think if they read this, my partners, my boss, and my patients. And I think you do have to have a why behind it. And I think what my why kind of morphed into is the fact that the visibility of a female trauma surgeon who's married with children and has outside interests and research and all these things, it struck a chord with people. And I think especially at a time when people were struggling with sort of this work-life integration and then COVID and everything else, sometimes seeing is believing. And I think that's really important when we're talking about diversity as well. So that kind of became my why. And I completely agree. I'm almost scared now to tweet.
And so just to piggyback, I think the why is really important. And to me, to not, because I don't want to condemn the whole thing, because it's obviously that would be not accurate and not good. I think if the why is to participate in your community, I think it's a really good reason to. I just don't use it to check someone's job for the reasons that I said, but I do think it would be better if it wasn't so if it wasn't so designed to feed confirmation bias. But I think the why to be participatory in your community, in your profession, I think that's a great reason to use social media.
Can I ask other members, why did you start your Twitter accounts?
Why made you?
You'll say. I, like Ronnie, was told I needed to have one, and it actually was my presidential year here at the Southwestern. So I've never changed my profile picture from, I guess it's now 6 years ago, because it was literally standing in the lobby here at this meeting in Hawaii. And it was, so it sort of captures a whole reason behind my why. And so for me, it was really, all of us have something that we are trying to, on some level, put forth. And so I agree with Jamie, to be a female surgeon or a female trauma surgeon in a position of leadership and of being able to sort of say, hey, this is possible. This is something that any of us can attain, was sort of my why. And plus a few of my friends were like, okay, it's time for you to do this. But that really was my why, and continues to be really the reason why I have a little bit of interaction, because I think it is important. Unless you see it, often it is, you don't really believe that you could do it.
I think we keep talking about Twitter, like that's where all we do. Like that's where my professional presence is probably the most prominent, but I spend way more time on Facebook. I do it because it's fun. I like to see pictures of my buddies' kids. I like to see jokes and memes, and I have a good time. And what happens, I'm sure, are people here in like closed Facebook groups for whatever you're interested in? You could get a closed Facebook group for cars if you're into cars. I'm into colorectal surgery, so I'm in some closed colorectal surgery groups. And that's where I do way more interacting than I do on Twitter, because it's a group of 900 people that all have the same goal. But I think it's important to realize that there's unintentional overlap between your personal and professional lives online. And so I got into it to network with my buddies, and now I'm like discussing papers or, talking about getting your colonoscopy and, March and all these things. And so there's overlap there. It's just to be careful because the target is maybe like who you're targeting doesn't necessarily equal who you're actually reaching, if that makes sense. But as far as Twitter goes, which is what a lot of people in professional and surgery talk about, is the main. Twitter's like way dead compared to Facebook and Instagram and all those other platforms. The engagement's way lower. But the reason I got on there is so I could network, because when you're a new faculty, which when I joined how many years ago, my profile is the same as Steve Wexner's profile, right? And so you have like this leveling of the playing field that allows you to interact with experts in the field, and it's just a wonderful tool. It's just volatile too, and it's unpredictable, which is why these are talking about the dangers of it. It's very true, but it's also a lot of fun.
So I actually got on Twitter because of Sages, actually. I was chair of the membership committee. And the membership committee had a lot of young people on the membership committee to try and figure out how we were going to grow membership. And so they came up with the idea that we need to get on Twitter and tweet things that were happening at the meeting to encourage people to be interested in Sages. And so I had to have a Twitter account in order to do that. And so this is, oh gosh, I don't even know how many years ago when I was chair of the membership committee. And it actually worked because there were so many responses to things that I do think it actually brought young people into the organization who was the sort of demographic that we were looking to grow at the time through the membership committee.
And I think to echo that, in terms of the value of it, one, we've talked about obviously showcasing diversity. We've talked about highlighting our work that we do. And I think that I've definitely been on the fortunate end of my social media profile. Just a quick plug. I'm the host for the Journal of the American College of Surgeons podcast, The Operative Word. Please subscribe. And it's like an album drop, like you just got to mention it. I was very fortunate to be invited to do that. And I think part of that is because of my social media profile. I mean, I've been fortunate in having opportunities handed to me because of that. And I will echo, especially I think the meeting bit where I've been invited to speak at international meetings or smaller scientific meetings because they want to help bring attention to the great work that they're doing. And so when you start looking at my academic, you start looking at promotion and tenure, you start looking at national reputation, international reputation, it's definitely helped. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm not really being full disclosure in that I have definitely benefited, even from being on this podium. Right? I mean, I get to put that down. It's a scientific organization, it's activity, it's on my CV. And so I think that there can be a lot of good. I think to me, it goes back to the why. And if you stick to my content is reflective of my why, and you remain true to yourself, then I think there's a lot of opportunity for medical students, residents, junior faculty. And to me, that also even extends to research and collaboration, and people reach out and say, oh, hey, this great stuff you're doing with sleep deprivation. I'm interested in this. And all of a sudden now I'm collaborating on other projects. So I think that it's multifaceted. There's a lot of great opportunity. And I think it's just like any other really great tool. You have to be careful with how you use it.
Sage advice there.
Oh,
Seriously.
thank you.
So would you say that it's important for residents to have some sort of professional profile online?
I get asked that a lot. I go back to, and maybe it's just, I try to teach my residents, time is the highest priced real estate because you can't buy it. You can't buy more time. You can buy lots of other things, right? Childcare, help at home, someone to mow the lawn. So for me, if you're going to do something, what is your purpose behind it? And for residents, I will say personally, now I'm not a residency program director, so I'd love to hear from other panelists, but, and I don't look at the residents' profiles that we're interviewing for residency. That being said, do I have residents who we're having our, mixers or in-person meetings or interviews, and they mention social media, and then we start talking, it does give us a talking point, and it might help me remember that resident, later when we're discussing, but I don't know. I mean, there's been this big push for these residents that they have to have a social media profile in order to match. And I will tell you, as someone who's clearly, active on social media, it doesn't really factor for me when I'm interviewing residents. I don't know. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are, but I think it almost bothers me a little bit that we've gotten this narrative out that in order for them to match, or for medical students to match in a residency, or for residents to match in a fellowship, that they have to have this. And it just doesn't factor for me.
No factor here.
Yeah, it doesn't factor for us. As I said, I don't check profiles,
Yeah.
partly because I don't want anybody to say that program director's like keeps looking at my
Right.
account and stalking me, right?
Stalking.
And so it's the last thing you need as a program director, to have someone think you're stalking them on their Facebook page or their Twitter account. I think Sean brought up a good point. So for me, Facebook is about the communities that I've created in Facebook. It's friends, it's family, and we share information with people you want to share with. But I'm on a few Facebook groups where people post things, and it's incredible, to Dr. Coleman's point, the amount of negative commentary sometimes that you see out there. And I can see how when you put something seemingly innocent on there with the negative feedback that you can't really respond to, it just sort of goes down the rabbit hole after a while, that I can see why it can be quite bothersome. So we don't encourage people to or not to have social media presence if they're going to apply to residency. At least I don't for the medical students applying to surgery programs. But I can see how people can use it to their advantage, but it can also work against them.
Yeah, I think young people are highly sophisticated with respect to social media. And I mean, I think it definitely should not be a bunch of old people telling them what to do about it, because I mean, I think they're sophisticated enough to make that decision on their own. And I think if there's a good why, and then that's a reason to do it. But I don't think it limits anyone to not do that. I've never been in a discussion with, in fact, I can't really remember a resident over there, have to keep me honest. I mean, I can't ever remember having a discussion about, is it a negative or a positive in any way? I think it's a neutral from our standpoint.
And I was gonna say, how much does it take to actually have a presence? Like, I mean, you saw all of our profiles. I would say that I have, I retweet well because I know how to do that. But just being honest, so I think to have this presence, like I follow Jamie because she has funny things she puts about her kids on there who I know, or has a great, message around trauma issues. I mean, so to have a presence, for it to really rise to the level of acknowledgement and consciousness on the behalf of Ken, when he's looking at different people, that's a lot of activity in that forum. And so I would hate for people to feel like they have to put content out there that maybe is or isn't how they're feeling, because they have to have a presence. And so I would rather see presence in, maybe it can be in social media, but it could also be in community involvement or in research or in different activities. And so, to echo, time is our greatest commodity. That, to me, as a fellowship director, I look for presence and engagement, but it can be in a variety of different forums. And whether or not someone is or isn't on, I don't check, because I would have to learn how to search within it. So to me, it's really about what's your engagement and your profile and your presence. Sometimes I go, oh yeah, I keep seeing that person talking about X. Like I might want to talk to them about that in person sometime. Or, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure I would have tweeted that way. So it's less of an issue there. It's more about what's your broader sort of what you bring to the table.
I feel like I want, and I have I'm a devil's advocate. I have to have a contrarian by definition. Alex learned that the hard way a few years ago. But the reason I bring it up is that like there's things you control and things you can't control. There's like these two categories, and you can control your online presence. You can control what people see. And there's a huge advantage to that. Whether you're a trainee who's trying to look good for the program directors that do search you out, or whether you're a new person on the job, you've only done 10 colectomies, Rishi, but you look like an expert online when they Google you because patients are using this. It's great that we don't want to use it, but the patients are using it. Huge majority of patients use the internet to find their medical information, to find their doctor. And so I invite all of you guys to Google me if you want to, because I've manipulated it, by joining Facebook and LinkedIn. I don't post on LinkedIn at all, but that way, if you Google me, LinkedIn comes up way before that vitals.com review that says I'm a horrible surgeon. Does that make sense? And so this is the thing that you have control over. You provide good information. And I will tell you.
Like, this is like social media 101 of how to,
Oh.
I mean,
But
this is good. I'm taking it in. I like
We're-
it.
we're re- we're
We're
ready
taking
to go.
notes. Yeah.
there was a time, and the Nebraska people can account to this. There was a time when our GI group was there's a big problem. They lost their chief. They weren't scoping. And so a lot of my partners weren't doing a lot of cases because they weren't finding things to send to the surgeon. Meanwhile, my clinics were full because the patients found me online. And so, so you're slump proof when you have that type of presence online. And so it's you don't have to do it, but this is like a very powerful tool. If you use it correctly, can really bring up your practice, no matter what level you're at, trainee or practicing surgeon.
All right, we just have a few minutes left. We want to go ahead and open up for questions. Krista.
In their careers. Use social media to enhance, because, I'm often talking about, hey, I want to get more involved. How do I show myself? And I mean that that's not for the work, obviously, but how do we use social media to do that? To say, hey, I'm interested, I'm active, I'm a good servant. Throw that out.
So I think one of the ways that I actually have used social media is to promote my trainees. And to, example, one of my fellows was at a meeting and won an award. And so I said, hey, and I wasn't even at the meet. I was like, send me a picture, send me the exact name of the award, send me or I'll get online and screenshot what the award looks like. And then I tweet out, hey, look at this fabulous thing. So I think it is a way to magnify someone's accomplishments or presence, or, we all the time we see different posts of individuals at the podium. So I actually like to use it that way to sort of be like, oh, look at that. That's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. So it can be a nice discovery method that way.
I'm kind of bummed that none of you guys have retweeted my tweet about this GME breakfast. I
We're not
tweeted it
gonna
out like
retweet
30
it.
minutes ago.
No, nobody retweeted.
Not a single person did anything about it. So I just group. Oh,
Manipulating
you did, thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Already sent it?
I
Like,
hadn't
this
seen
is,
it.
oh, Roxy.
don't
Roxy
retweet
is
it.
all
Thank you for doing
over
that. Thank you.
the retweet.
You can amplify things online. So you can make it look like you are super experienced even when you're brand new. You give an opinion about something, like here's how I do my right colons. In your opinion, even though you've been in practice for 10 minutes, it's similar weight to the guy who's been doing it for 20 years. And so there's the person that benefits the most, people you're talking about, those people that benefit the most from social media, because you can amplify the things you want. It's no different than my advice from my junior partner, Dr. Batra, was every time he does a really cool case nobody else can do, I said, take it to tumor board. And you go, because you're at tumor board, you go, here's this amazing thing that I did that nobody else can do. And it's just peacocking, but then you disguise it with a question. But my question is, should we get genetics involved, or whatever? And no, you're just showing it, social media is an inherently narcissistic, self-promoting thing,
Well,
and so.
I mean, more ammo here. I mean,
Just evolved.
But that's the person that benefits the most, is that new person that can kind of really make it seem like they're so experienced or doing so much because there's sample bias, right? So.
And I think too, we're kind of talking about in-person networking and social media networking almost in two silos, but really they overlap so much and they really enhance each other. So, where you've interacted with someone online and then you go to the meeting and you see them. And already you feel like you have a connection with that person and they know your face or they know your name. And it also, I think, helps for junior people, Dr. Copson, giving them the confidence to go up to somebody that they might not normally go up to because they've either interacted or they've seen something, and it makes these leaders seem more accessible. When they see them online, it's like, oh, okay, I can go up there and I can talk to them. And so I really think, for my advice for a junior person is, definitely start online, start finding leaders in your field, your national organizations, your specialty, your specialty groups, if you're interested, and start interacting with them online. And then when you are in person, you can make that additional connection to where you could have either a deeper conversation or that then leads to an opportunity because people feel like they know you. That is one thing I will say with having an online presence is, even though for a lot of us, it's because I'm not a millennial, I'm in the generation before that. And for a lot of people, like, oh, those relationships aren't real. These are felt to be very real relationships. And so you can seem more accessible. People will come up and talk to you. People feel like they know you based off of how you are on social media. It's always funny. I want to wear a t-shirt when I go to like the college because everyone's like, they meet me and they're like, oh, it's so great to see you. And they're like, oh, you're so short. Yes, I am. But in their head, they had, right, like not only a physical image of who I am, but also who I am from a personality standpoint. And so I think, again, it's trying to remain true without tone, without body language online with my personality. And I think that that's just a key bit for junior members, our young early career surgeons, is to use it to help them amplify and give them opportunities in person as well. I think they really do complement each other.
and for Dr. Kalb's question, I think from the old person here, I think be professional. To summarize kind of the discussion, be professional. That's the best way to highlight yourself is, and by that I mean to be true to what we profess. The patient's interests come first. So be professional. And then words from my grandmother who predated social media by a century. If you want to have friends, make yourself friendly. Make yourself friendly. And I think you have to be aware of that on social media. There's a lot of people not being friendly on social media, but if you want to have friends, make yourself friendly. So that advice.
Just out of curiosity, how many people here have a Twitter account in the room? Quite a few, so.
All right, we're out of time. So thank you all very much for that discussion. It's really great.
We'll answer questions afterwards if you want to,
Yes. Thank you.
or on Twitter, maybe.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hi. How are you?